Access, activate, integrate. We've gotten a lot of questions kind of from the audience about what does walking through prep work look like and setting the stage for productive training. So I'm going to kind of lay out some of the key principles that I like to walk through in regards to making sure that we're setting an athlete up or yourself up for a training session to come. So like before diving into a training session, the way that prep work should be structured should be in a way to improve movement quality, reduce injury risk, and ultimately improve performance. So you've heard me talk about this before in various different videos, whether it was on my channel or the J3 University page, about following a three-phase progression to prep work. So that would be access, activate, integrate. And so what I'm going to walk you through is just some classic examples of what this is, define these for you so that you can start to use this in your session. So access, gaining access to the required range of motion. Activate, engaging specific target tissues, and then integrate is applying activation into a compound movement. Now, this could emulate the primary lift of the day. This could be the primary lift of the day, but we need to make sure that we layer these actions properly. And the reason we layer them in this direction is so that we can gain more access to range of motion, that we need to be able to take target tissues through a full range throughout a session, prepare those tissues for load, and then get them ready for performing in the primary lift of the session. And so when we do it this way, we kind of have this phasic approach of preparing. It allows us to start the session off in a better spot and ultimately probably get more out of not only the first movement of the day, but the movements to come. So just to kind of dive straight into access, when we look at access, we look at the need of creating range of motion. Now, this can vary in a bunch of different ways. For most people, this is going to be some form of static stretching, especially like if a muscle group's excessively tight. I do really like versions of loaded stretching to help people get into ranges that they have trouble getting into. So this would be passive loading. So having a load passively take you into positions. This obviously wouldn't be maximal loading, but this is a great way to improve rotation of the shoulder joint, improve access to certain positions from squatting or whatever it might be. And we're going to use this as a part of pretty much every session. There's, especially nowadays with how much we sit and we're sitting at a desk, there's rarely a day that you're going to walk into the gym feeling pretty much ready to roll. So I put an example down below, like preparing for a lower body session. So if we have a listener needing improved range of motion or access to depth in squatting, let's say, a common place that you'll start will be some version of a kneeling internal rotation stretch, some sort of couch stretch. We're basically just trying to take the femurs through some sort of extension, preferably some internal rotation to gain some access to that. A lot of people do really well with some sort of isometric hold in the bottom of a squat pattern, or really like an anterior loaded goblet squat, get them into that depth, kind of load those lengthened tissues in the bottom of the squat pattern. Make sure they're getting into the bottom of the squat pattern appropriately, but it's a great way to kind of start the session and get them having more access to the ranges that they're going to see in their actual session. Now, when we move into activate, this can vary quite a lot. This can go anywhere from just direct concentric, eccentric contractions for a body part that we're going to train. This could include stability work. This could include a lot of different variations that you could see. Really the goal with making sure that the target musculature is activated is that once we have opened up range of motion and we have that available and we're able to reinforce like the ability to get into these positions, we're wanting to reinforce this with isolated patterns that drive some sort of preparation-based contraction for the actual training. So things that are going to allow us to have a high mind to muscle connection. A lot of times we'll be wanting to use slower tempos to make sure that we get into the right positions. And these are some great ways to kind of start to get that body firing like, hey, I need to be able to be ready to handle load. We're going to be using, like I said, isolated contractions from a concentric eccentric positions. We're going to be using stability work here to kind of prepare for stabilizing patterns, especially if we're loading like a back squat. And so I put some examples of like ensuring that glutes and adductors contribute effectively to squatting patterns, because I feel like a lot of you struggle with that. Classic examples that you can use in this is going to be a single-legged glute bridge, some sort of direct adductor activation, whether it be a Copenhagen plank. Some people like adductor machine, I don't think it's a bad way to kind of get those adductors awake. We wouldn't want to take them to failure or anywhere close to failure, in my opinion. This should be pretty lightly loaded and just getting adductors working. I don't see high levels of adductor fatigue contributing to better squatting, especially with pelvic stability. I do think that this is something where we can get blood flow to the target tissues that we're going to be training, whether it be quads, glutes, hamstrings, whatever. And this would change based on kind of how that lower body session was structured. But this is like a classic way or a classic example of what it might look like to use activate in your routine. And then integrate is applying it to the movement patterns that are to come. So we've accessed the range, we've activated the target tissues, and now we need to start to propriocept our way into the first movement of the day. Now, a ton of different ways you can do this. This is like probably the most variable portion of prep work, because there's going to be days where you fly through the prep work and you can probably just jump into the primary pattern of the day as your integrate. You can see I put that as number 4. Or there might be days where you feel pretty good from, access and activate, but there's probably a little bit more that needs to be done in order to be able to make sure this body's prepared for whatever that primary lift is. And so classic ones that I'll use is like a goblet loaded Cossack squat. Really like this for people who struggle with adductor loading because you can get into that lengthened adductor on the opposite side of the leg that's squatting. Counterbalance squat. This is great for people who have a tendency to try to like shift those hips back. It's a way to give them a counterbalance and stay more vertical and kind of integrate that feeling of staying more vertical for a quad bias squat. Single-legged RDL into a lunge is probably my all-time favorite way to integrate into a session. It just takes you through both pretty much extreme end ranges of hip positions that you're going to see. And then obviously primary pattern of the day is the most time-efficient one. So like I said, there's multiple ways to do this. Some people will fly through this in 5 to 7 minutes. They move pretty well. They don't really need a whole lot of access work. They do a little bit of activate work and then they kind of integrate it into their session. Some people it's going to take 10 to 15 minutes because they don't move well and they need to improve their access to these positions. But this is just like a framework, right? So this is kind of how this framework should apply, and it'll apply to multiple different sessions, whether it be upper, push, pull, whatever your session would be. There's going to be a way to take yourself through access, activate, integrate, no matter what it might be. So if we cross apply this into like an upper body pressing day, we could have access be some sort of pec stretch with thoracic extension. We could separate those and do a pec stretch and thoracic extension in and of it by itself, but taking your body through some sort of variation of that. Activate being a scapular push-up or some sort of external rotation challenge, like a banded external rotation, to trying to find these end ranges of shoulders that hopefully we don't have to see within pressing, but to prepare ourselves in case we need to see those end ranges. And then integrating that with something that's going to take us through pressing ranges, maybe even further than the ranges we will need. I like to use something that's going to require a lot of serratus work here. So you'll see a lot of times landmine press and reach. You'll see some kettlebell bottom under presses. I really like primary patterns here. So what I'll do as activate sometimes is I have you'll see a lot of my clients doing this, like activation and shorten in range for pecs. And then that'll lead into the primary movement of the day, or it'll actually be, I'll shift the activate portion of the prep work in session. So it'll be, they'll do some primary access work. They'll do their like primary lateral of the day. They'll do their lateral raise. Then they'll do their activate and then go into pressing. And that way I'm just sequencing the activate portion directly into the pressing work that they need it the most. So you'll see that quite a bit. And so no matter the session, like hypertrophy performance, we should be taking our athlete through prep work that allows them to pull more out of that session. So when I move activate intra-session, what I'm doing here is I'm just trying to get them to get more mechanical tension to the target tissues. So by structuring prep work this way, access, activate, integrate, we set the stage for better movement efficiency. Movement efficiency can look 100 different ways depending on the adaptation you're trying to drive. For hypertrophy, movement efficiency looks like driving mechanical tension to the target tissues without having other body parts compensate or get in the way. This is going to be accessing end ranges for lengthened loading pretty easily, or more easy than when you walk into the gym. This is going to be keeping loading on those target tissues from a stability standpoint. And that's a classic way that we can reduce injury risk, but maximize driving the adaptation of hypertrophy. If we look at performance, performance is going to be a lot about how much force can we apply in patterns that are translating into sports performance. So there's a multiple different ways that we can allow someone to have better movement efficiency. We just need to match, access, activate, integrate to the movement efficiency that drives the adaptation you're trying to drive. And what this does is creates a long-term approach that keeps the athlete healthier. It keeps them getting more out of each session. And ultimately, the goal would be you'll be able to drive as much of a robust adaptation or even a better one with less overall work and kind of raise that glass ceiling for that athlete by raising their performance metrics. So this is just kind of the initial introduction of what access, activate, integrate. Obviously, there's a lot that goes into this about choosing access, choosing activate, choosing integrate, and being able to move that into a session appropriately. We've got more coursework coming out soon that I'm going to be building that I'm pretty excited about. So make sure you guys check that out over at J3 University when it does come out. You can go ahead and check out any of the courses that we have over there that will go ahead and help you with any of the goal sets for hypertrophy, especially that you might have. And stay tuned because we got a lot more coming your way.